story now comes out of Law 360, and this involves the Second Amendment, and it's got issues that are, personal to me because they happen to me, but they also involve a lot of people who have been caught up in the prohibition against marijuana. There was I don't know how many actually got accepted by the Supreme Court and sent back down, but there was a truckload of Second Amendment cases about restricting people's gun rights that were in front of the court in what we call a petition for certiorari. These are discretionary petitions, and the court took all these cases and then remanded them back down to the appellate court for further proceedings after the court decided a case called Rahimi, U.S. versus Rahimi. This is the domestic violence case, and the court found that domestic violence had a tradition analogous to other prohibitions back in the day that stopped you from carrying your guns. Okay. Now, there was the Bruin case 2 years ago out of New York, put the burden onto the government to go back and show historically that there was analogous treatment of guns back at the founding of our country. Okay? And that has started just an absolute shit show because historians can't agree on much of anything, let alone how things were handled 200 years ago. They all get their modern twist on it. Now, one of the several of the cases were about being a felon. Okay, there was a drug case. There's also a case about taking away somebody's guns before they're convicted of a crime. Now, all of these things happened to me. This is kind of personal to me. When I got indicted and arrested, my guns had to go. I had to verify they were gone. I'm a felon. I can't have them. Okay, and even if I could right now, the use of cannabis as an illegal drug has been caught up in prohibition of guns. Now, I work with a lot of veterans, and I'm a veteran myself, and one of the concerns of getting your name any place testing positive for weed is that you could lose your gun rights. So this continues to be a problem for lots of people who use cannabis, but anybody who has a felony. Now, the historical problems here we have is that when our country was started, a felony was a capital offense. They hung you. So nobody was a felon that could be in possession of a gun after that. You were dead. Okay? We've expanded felonies to the point now where all kinds of things are felonies. And back in the day, there was a look at civic virtue and dangerousness as a way to restrict somebody's guns. Okay, and we're going to probably hear come out of these appellate courts all sorts of historical perspectives of how people didn't bother you about your guns or how they try to take them away. But one of the problems we have with drugs is it wasn't until very recently that drugs was a problem getting guns. Okay? And Rico, this might interest you. It wasn't until 1968 when the federal government saw the Black Panthers show up with their rifles slung at these meetings that the white folks in Congress they shit themselves a little bit. We got to figure out a way to stop these black guys from showing up with guns. So, you know what? Now, if you're a felon, you can't have a gun. Some of the traditions they're going to be looking at are very recent. Okay, back up until they made drugs illegal, you could smoke all the weeds you want and go buy a gun. You could shoot heroin and go buy a gun. Okay, and so what we're going to see out of this court is, and I'm going to predict this is going to be a backward-looking historical shit show, try and justify why some gun law should be affirmed or it should be found unconstitutional. I don't know what the answers are going to be. I think this court is lining up to go way, way back and really parse through at common law how people who were not following the rules were treated and whether they lost their guns. Dangerousness is something that has historically been used. They didn't take your guns away forever if you were dangerous. And when you got out of prison, they gave them back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So a whole lot of what's happened over our history is going to be problematic for trying to rein in some of the misuse of guns that we're having today. Responsible gun owners should not be concerned, but people who leave their guns available to their kid who's seeing fucking dinosaurs and wanting to blow the world up and not doing something about it, I think those are going to be further issues we're going to have to deal with here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an answer to this. It's an issue we've been talking about for a while and Hunter Biden got caught up in this. So it isn't like it's just weed. This is going to be an interesting next session as these come back up before the courts. We're going to see the history of how people were treated in the past with respect to their guns. I'm going to throw this back at you. What do you guys all have to say?
So, Dale, thank you for pointing out like the whole gun restriction came when Black folks started to arm themselves and show that they too can protect their own freedoms. And as soon as you give a Black man too much freedom, you gotta reel that one back in. And just wanted to give a shout out to Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan was the force behind that out here in California, making sure Black folks did not have access to those guns, the same guns that they were being forced upon them in their own communities.
It's interesting because most people don't know the notion that the Black Panthers pioneered the open carry concept,
mm-hmm.
and that there is a direct chronological correlation between them exercising their visible Second Amendment rights and the notion that cannabis-related felonies would take away someone's Second Amendment rights for the rest of their life. It, frankly, is if we look back at history and non-fudge statistics, it's a pretty obvious way in which you get to disarm communities. And I think, and Dale said it, I've said it, those of us who are affected by the residual effects of felony convictions understand that expungement doesn't restore your Second Amendment rights. And the idea that somebody could make a mistake at 19 years old and 69 years old, they wouldn't ever be able to even go hunting with a mm-hmm. long gun rifle. It's really one of the biggest challenges, I think, in the way American law is currently being provided to us. And in this hypersensitive environment where you do have these school shooters and you got these people who are coming in crazy, the notion of gun reform, some of these sensible adjustments has gotten lost in the hysteria, the rightful hysteria around keeping kids safe in schools and the way to limit people who have psychological issues from getting a 300-round Betamax. But the idea that a felon would never, ever, ever for the rest of their life ever be able to have any firearm except for some black powder musket is total, say the word, Dale, we've got an over-under on how many times you say it. Total what? Total
bullshit.
Thank you.
Bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Bullshit.
I mean, I'm all for discourse.
And you use the dangerousness standard. Okay. If someone gets convicted of a nonviolent crime, and say you steal something, and you're now going to be in the same category as someone who is a convicted murderer, or they are engaged in violent crimes. Mm-hmm. That's hard for me to parse out. I grew weed and tried to give it to sick people for free. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wasn't slinging weed down to local junior high school and shit like that. And even if I was, there was no violence involved. So the idea of civic virtue versus dangerousness, going back, that's what they were looking at 250 years ago. Mm-hmm. Is that really the appropriate time? One of the cases is, do we really have to go back and look to the 1791 enactment of Second Amendment for our frame of reference? And the other one is, what's analogous to what was done in those days to restrict or prohibit you from having guns? What are analogies today? And this is just going to be an absolute shit show of when do we start looking and what's analogous to what used to happen. Because drugs were never, ever something that was used to restrict your gun rights until most recent times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And on that, we're going to roll right into
Never mind Hunter Biden. I say Hunter S. Thompson for vice president.
Yeah.